Well, welcome everyone. Such a pleasure to see each one of you here. Folks who are here in the room, folks who are practicing online. It's wonderful to get a chance to be here and hear the wisdom of the Buddha and Buddhists from long ago and from today. So let's see, the only announcement I have right now is just a reminder that on October 5th, we will be having the Autumn Gathering. That's a time for the whole community to get together. It's literally the biggest holiday of the year in early Buddhist tradition. And if you come virtually or come in person, it's all wonderful, and we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about appreciation for each other. As usual for the Sunday morning program, we will just do about 10 minutes or so of guided meditation. And today we're going to focus on our senses. And then I'll give a Dhamma talk, and there'll be a bit of time at the end for questions and reflections. Lovely. So you can begin to establish your meditation posture, beginning with some movement of the body, maybe moving the head or rocking the body from side to side and front to back. Releasing tension that you might find, or any habit of leaning to one side or another. And letting the body come into a naturally balanced and upright posture. And allowing the belly to soften and settle. And becoming aware of your feet, wherever they might be resting, or perhaps even just one foot, just aware of the sensations of touch in one foot. No need to strain in any way, just receiving the sensations of touch in the foot. Perhaps noticing whether those sensations of touch in the foot are pleasant or unpleasant or just neutral. And staying curious. How is it from moment to moment? And now a shift to attend to the sensations of hearing. Again, just receiving the sensations of hearing. No need to stress, just being present, what arises and what ceases. All sorts of other thoughts and sensations may be arising, but the attention is resting on the sensations of hearing. And letting all the other sensations recede into the background. And now in these last few moments of the meditation, just turning to thoughts as sensations in the mind. Just like a sound or a touch. Just allowing the mind to rest on thoughts as momentary sensations. All right. Beautiful. That brings us to the end of the meditation program. And I will just move directly into the Dhamma talk. So if you have any questions or reflections on the meditation itself, we'll take those at the end. And I'll begin as usual with the homage to the Buddha and the Triple Gem. Feel free to chant along with your mics muted if you would like. Folks in the room too, if you want to chant along, you're welcome to. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Excuse me. A couple of days ago, it was my daughter's wedding day. She got married, and as part of the ceremony, I was asked to give a reading. So the mom of the groom, Debbie, John's mother, was going to give a reading from the Bible. They're Catholic on that side of the family, many of them. And then I was asked to give some kind of a reading from Buddhism. And so the Buddha had a lot to say about relationships, about skillful relationships, both in terms of individual relationships and also communities, how communities could be harmonious. And but there's one teaching that is particularly, I think, useful or resonant about how to keep up a relationship over the long term. And it's a teaching about balance, actually, about bringing balance. So the Buddha gives a story, he tells a story about some acrobats. So this is from the Connected Discourses, number 47, chapter 47, number 19. And it's called Setaka Sutta. Setaka is the name of the town in which this event happened, this teaching. And the Buddha tells a story about some acrobats, which some of you might imagine is a kind of unusual topic for the Buddha. He didn't really do a lot of talking about entertainment or circuses or acrobats. Not that there wasn't plenty of that going around. Not that there wasn't plenty of that happening in northern India at his time, about 6th century BC. But it just wasn't his thing mostly to be talking about that. But in this case, again, what he wants to speak about balance. And so he does that very subtly by using this metaphor or simile with the acrobats, even though he never actually says the word balance in the whole teaching. And it's a story about two people, a man and a woman, and there's some kind of way where the woman goes to the top of a pole. So the man is at the bottom and he's holding the pole steady, and then she kind of climbs up to the top and does some kind of performance. And they do this together, and this is how they earn their living, how they make their sustenance. And they're kind of talking, the two of them, about how to take care of one another. So it's really a profound teaching about care. And that's why I shared it at the wedding, and I wanted to share it with you today as well. The teaching about caring. And I won't quote exactly the first part because I think it can get confusing for people who's doing what there. But in any event, the woman says, she kind of disagrees with the gentleman at the bottom, her partner there. And they have two different opinions about how to take care of each other. But the Buddha says they're both right. They are both right. And so what is the right, what he describes as the skillful way of being in relationship, he says, when you take care of yourself, by doing that, you're actually taking care of others. And he also says, when you take care of others, then you are also taking care of yourself. Both things are necessary, taking care of ourselves and taking care of others. Both things are needed to bring balance to a skillful relationship. And it's not just about romantic partnerships. I mean, this particular simile, again, is people who are working together. But I think it also applies to intimate relationships or teacher-student relationships. In this case, it's made apparent that he was her teacher, this gentleman who's at the bottom of the pole, and so on. It works for many different forms. And then the Buddha goes on to say more specifically what he means by that, by taking care of oneself. So he says, how do you benefit others by taking care of yourself? You practice mindfulness, cultivate mindfulness, develop mindfulness. So that might seem like a very different form of self-care than what we often hear about, right? It's not a bubble bath or go get your nails painted or go get a massage or do your exercise, eat your vegetables, right? Right. Mindfulness, developing mindfulness is a means of care for yourself. So what's meant by mindfulness? I would propose that mindfulness in this context means being fully alive for your life, being fully present for your life, for the joys and the sadness, for the wins and the challenges, for the whole rainbow of what it means to be a human being. Being present for all of it. And there's another aspect that's sort of subtly in there that isn't being explicitly said, but I imagine that part of the reason for that teaching, that admonition on the part of the Buddha, is that when we start to observe our lives, we start to observe our own minds, our own bodies, then one thing that we also notice is how much of our difficulty comes from not understanding ourselves or from the ways that we react to what we're seeing instead of acknowledging what we're seeing, right? So there's another sutta, and I don't want to spend, I don't want to talk too much about that side of the equation, but there is another sutta in which the Buddha speaks about what's called the second arrow, right? So something unpleasant happens, you get stabbed with an arrow. That's the simile is something unpleasant happens. Ouch, it hurts, right? Sometimes you can actually see people do that, right? Somebody says something unpleasant and you can see someone react as if they were hit by an arrow. But then the second arrow is the reaction to that, the suffering that is caused by not being willing to accept that that has happened or not being able to receive that and attend to it skillfully, but instead having some sort of reaction, right? So reactions happen too, and then when reactions happen, then we attend to that, right? We take care of that arrow because we're not all perfectly skillful, and sometimes we're going to have more than that. But to come back to self-care, so the self-care of mindfulness is, yes, we begin with acknowledgement and acceptance of what's real about our experience, what's actually happening here. And then we can care for it. Then we can attend to it. And we can begin to observe maybe how we make choices, for better or for worse, that lead to our care and our balance and our well-being, or lead away from that. And then the Buddha also says, well, how about taking care of others? How is it that you benefit by taking care of others? So he says there are four practices that we can do to take care of others in a way that will also benefit us and that will lead to these kinds of wholesome, balanced relationships. So the first is patience. Patience, meaning leaving room for your loved one, for this person you're in relationship with, making time for them. Yeah. The second is harmlessness. Harmlessness. So really making an effort not to hurt the person you're in relationship with, to actually foster their well-being and support them rather than hurting them. And those two are somewhat related, right? Patience and harmlessness. Because oftentimes when we feel like we want to hurt someone, or we accidentally hurt someone because of the strength of our own suffering, it's because we haven't found enough room for our own experience or theirs. No? So we make room and we take up that path of well-being, of supporting well-being. And on that note, the quote that comes to mind, I hadn't planned on sharing this, but suddenly it comes to mind, that quote by Mother Teresa, who said, I believe it's her, who said that no act of kindness is ever wasted. No act of kindness is ever wasted. And so loving kindness is the third of the 4 practices. Metta, loving kindness. So love and kindness are some of the most powerful practices, some of the most powerful qualities we can develop in our hearts and minds. The Buddha said, more powerful than any other form of practice that will shift your, you could say, momentum, your karmic momentum, is the practice of loving kindness. It adds more positiveness into your stream of being than almost any other kind of practice. 16 times more powerful, he said. Why 16? I don't know. Only the Buddha knows. The one that's more powerful than that, though, he said very clearly, is insight into impermanence. So maybe I'll talk about that next week, because that's not on our topic this week. But loving kindness. Why? Because it is a quality. This is a quality of mind, or we might think of it sometimes as 2 qualities of mind brought together that are bringing clarity, that allow the mind to have this brightness and this pleasant feeling and vastness, openness. So loving kindness is also the basis for forms of concentration that are incredibly vast, so vast that the Buddha said they are boundless. We can experience ourselves as limitless beings through the practice of love and kindness. So with clarity and openness in our hearts, we come into relationship. With the clarity and openness of loving kindness. And the 4th quality is empathy. Empathy. And of course, what is empathy if not having your heart be open to the experience of the person that you're relating to? What's happening for them? It's a position, it's a stance, that kind of openness that requires a fair amount of courage to really be open to what's happening for another person. A fair amount of steadiness, the steadiness that the mindfulness will bring. But it also requires, I would suggest, a fair amount of humility to try to empathize with another human being. Because we are completely unique, each one of us a completely unique constellation of conditions of body and mind. So we'll never be perfect in our empathy. And it's good to approach it from that standpoint, right? With that kind of curious, well, what is it? How is it now? Eihei Dogen is the founder of the Japanese school of Buddhism called Soto Zen. He said, only a fish knows a fish's heart. Only a fish knows a fish's heart, which I interpret to mean, various people have interpreted in various ways, but I interpret that to mean something like that, like each one of us can know our own heart. We can't know each other's hearts perfectly, but we can do our best to be there for each other's expression and to accept that as unique. So that's also in the teachings of the Buddha. In the Sutta Nipada, some of the earliest teachings, most profound teachings in poetic form mostly in the canon, the Buddha in the chapter of 8, he says, don't see yourself as equal to another, or as less than another, or as more than another. So what does that leave you? If you're not better than, or worse than, or equal to, then what does that leave you? It means you're incomparable, each person so unique that there's no need to compare. You simply meet what's here. Do your best to meet what's here, time and time and time again. And that's what brings the intimacy, and that's what brings the balance. So the Buddha, just to close with his words again, the Buddha says, by taking care of yourself, you take care of others. And by taking care of others, you take care of yourself. And I would say, just from a personal standpoint, I feel really tremendously blessed that I've had the opportunity all these many years to put that into practice with my daughter Kayla and see how right the Buddha was. And so I wish you all some courage and some humility and some mindfulness so that you can come into your relationships, maybe with some patience and sense of well-being and kindness and love and empathy. All right, folks. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. And there's plenty of time for reflections or questions or, corrections, concerns, anything you want to share about the talk, about the meditation.
Yeah, I can go.
Please, Kylie, go ahead.
Thank you. It's a good question. Yeah, and everything landed. I felt like, God, how did you know that I needed to hear this today? So I was mostly contemplating that after you finished. But what gets in the way of, taking care of myself for sure. With others, I tend to be a little bit better about being mindful, maybe. But taking care of myself by with mindfulness. I think what usually gets in the way is I have this habit of, and this is going to sound kind of mean to myself, but it's not meant in this way, but I have this way of lying to myself, like, you know, and I'm kind of just discovering how that just really is so natural, right? I don't know what, I need to soothe myself. So I just get these little lies cooking, and they're, I don't have an example. It's not like I'm sitting here, I'm not a dishonest person by any stretch. But it actually really gets in the way of the thing I desire most, which is to walk through each day with a greater sense of mindfulness. It's really my intention when I wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And there it goes, it disappears, and it's, yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Okay. Taj is going to say something. You can use the mic if you would, so people can hear. Just this is the top of it right there. So just put that part closer.
First time with the mic. Oh, sure, whatever. Yeah, whatever makes it. Hi, I'm in person today. It makes me think of a tendency I have, right? Which is, like I have a really good friend she has like a lot of life difficulties. And I have this tendency to sort of worry about someone, which I think is like a more ego-driven and less mindful way of having compassion. Because if I'm sort of worried about you, I'm like, oh, you've got something going on and maybe I need to help or fix it or whatever, right? And it just made me think of that's the very different place to hold than sort of a mindful, compassionate place. And I think it's because it's hard to hold an experience like what that person is really going through. If it's very painful, it's easier to sort of worry about them, which is kind of a peer, than to actually be compassionate towards them. So that's kind of what came up for me.
Yes, Shadanya, please share.
Thank you for this talk. So I was kind of trying to relate it to a situation that actually happened yesterday.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, well, what does this mean for just the choices I made? And so the situation was that I was cleaning my dog's ear. My dog, I kind of got a little uncomfortable about it. And so a member of my family got really upset about it and kind of lost their temper at me, insisted that I take the dog to the vet. And, just things were said, right? So, and I was like, just said, kind of just trying to calm the situation down, saying, just let's give it some time. But obviously, the arrow hit. And so I was like, oh, this is so exhausting. We just keep going round and round in circles with just having this reaction to not getting one's way. And I'm sure I'm that way too, but I just don't see it at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, maybe I just need to practice silence. And that will perhaps be less aggravating or damaging, but the silence also doesn't help because we are a family and we live under the same roof.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about my position and thinking, is that the opposite of loving kindness? Is it, how much of it is self-care and how much of it is not?
Mm-hmm.
So how much of it is kind of caring for the other person, but also knowing that we're all entrenched in our habits. So I'm sure there are so many people who have difficulty living in harmony, right? And yet the circumstances are such that maybe this is just the cards that we have, right? Just the results of our past actions. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Mm. Yes, I have thoughts, Sharana. So first of all, I'm going to say, yes, it is a very good example because, you know, as you said, it's things happen and then you're interpreting it one way or you're seeing it in one way and framing it in one way, and somebody else is seeing the same event happening and having a different interpretation and a different feeling about it. And I agree with you that neither silence nor conflict is particularly helpful usually. And what I've learned is that there are a couple of ways to think about how to do this empathy part. Because what I have found in my experience, both as a chaplain and, you know, just being with people and being in relationship with people, is that until that person knows that you at least have some idea how they're framing it, how they're seeing it, they're going to sometimes continue to be loud about it. In fact, they're going to be more loud about it until they get the acknowledgement, right? So we've seen this, maybe you've seen this happen before. There's somebody that you're really trying to avoid, or somebody that you find uncomfortable or unpleasant in whatever way. And they start to talk to you and you're just kind of brushing them off. And the more that you try to brush them off, the more that they are getting in your face, right? So the idea is to inquire about what's happening for that person. Ask them, is it that you're feeling angry right now? Is it that you're feeling concern for the dog? Is it, sort of just try to suss out literally what is the thing for that person. Sometimes, folks haven't had the kind of practice of identifying what their feelings are, what their emotional content is. And then sometimes you might make a guess like that. Like, is it, to me, it sounds like, you're feeling very upset, you're hurt for something, or you're worried about something, or you're feeling anxious about something. You might take a guess and see, and give that person a chance to say yes or no. That's accurate or that's not accurate. So one thing is the empathy part, Sharanya, to really feel like you could step into that space of some more acknowledgement about what's happening for the other person. Because then once you both had a chance to talk about it, and then you also maybe get a chance to talk about what's happening for you. Not just why you think what you think or why you're right or any of that stuff, right? But like right now, I'm feeling angry or I'm feeling hurt or I'm feeling anxious about the dog or I'm feeling, right? Whatever it is. So a bit of sharing on your own side also. And that can, I find, at least put you both in a place where you you don't have to be loud about for somebody else to understand what your frame is or what you're going through. You might still not agree. That's another matter, right? But you might at least be at a place where you could understand why what's happening is happening and, better negotiate, perhaps. Like I think about nonviolent communication, for example, would be a good thing to learn, a good skill to learn. So Marshall Rosenberg set up this system called nonviolent communication, NVC, and is very, very useful and is based on that, is based on one expressing what the content, the emotional content of your life and then sharing that with someone and inviting them to do the same. And also if you need to make a request, then he talks about good ways to make a request of someone. So, and yeah, that's where I would start, Charanya. Maybe that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that what I'm hearing and what Kylie was sharing and what Taj is sharing also is that the times when we find it hard to do such a thing, you know, we do these other kinds of coping sometimes, right? These kinds of like not looking at the truth or sort of trying to cover up the truth, or Taj, you were saying worrying about someone, yeah, and sort of, but a worry that has some kind of a I'm the helper, you know, aspect to it, right? So these are ways that we're coping with what we believe is not being steady enough, stable enough to be present with the real content of the situation, the real truth of the situation. And it may or may not be an accurate assessment. That's the other thing I want to say, is that when you judge, oftentimes, if you judge yourself, oh, I can't do that, I'll be overwhelmed, or it feels too hard, or whatever it is, it's like, okay, that might be true. That might be true. And you might think about, oh, you know, practicing a little bit more equanimity, or finding a time and a space to talk where you feel a little bit more steady, or the time, you know, the time of day, or the place with the person, you know, not in the middle of a cafe somewhere or whatever. But it may also be inaccurate. It may be that you think that you cannot be present for what's true. And that's a fear that you have. But actually, just being present for what's true doesn't mean that you have to be able to fix it or make it any different, or even take it on, you know, even take it on. That was a very important skill for me to learn also as a chaplain, that how to meet somebody who was in maybe a lot of crisis, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of anger, whatever it was, very intense emotion, which, you know, I might find overwhelming if I weren't careful, if I weren't mindful. But knowing that I could be present for that as what's happening for them, and I don't have to take that on, right? So there's a beautiful story from the Buddha, where the Buddha is being accosted, verbally abused by someone who's very angry with him, because his nephew, the person who's angry, his nephew became a Buddhist monk, and that he was very unhappy about that, because he wanted him to become a Brahmin, to become part of the what ultimately becomes the Hindu tradition, as his family had. And he goes and he starts basically cussing out the Buddha. And as the story goes, the Buddha, you know, lets him vent for a while. And then the Buddha asks him a question. He says, hey, sir, when you have guests come over to your house, do you serve them tea and cookies? And the Buddha says, well, yes. Or not the Buddha, the Brahmin, actually, the person who's angry at the Buddha, says, well, yes, when we have guests, we serve them tea and cookies. You know, like, of course, we're civilized people. we do such things. And the Buddha says, and then what happens if the person doesn't want the cookies? And the Brahmin says, well, then they're still mine. The cookies are still mine. That person, if I try to give it to you and you don't want it, then it's still mine. And the Buddha says, likewise, your anger, I'm not receiving that gift. Your anger, that's still yours. So in an interesting statement, because the Buddha is very clearly acknowledging his anger. He's saying, I see your anger, and I don't have to take that on. I can meet you being angry right now, and I don't have to feel angry myself. Right? So knowing that we don't have to receive, we don't have to take on the things that we're meeting in someone else, I think also gives us an incredible amount of courage, an incredible amount of intimacy, again, ability to be with what's going on for them. Jennifer is on our board, I should say, on the board of Dassanaya. Thanks, she's being of service to the Sangha in that way, and I really appreciate that deeply. So please, Jen, please go ahead.
So the practice of giving and receiving has been part of Buddhism since its inception. And giving to Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports our guiding teacher, Dhammadipa, the physical location at the vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. So feel free to visit and donate, and feel free to visit our donation and giving pages to offer financial, material, and volunteer supports at dassanaya.org. In addition, about once a month, we email meditation class and retreat schedules. And of course, today's teaching is freely offered, freely given. And we just offer this statement so that people are aware. So
Great. Thank you so much,
yeah.
Jen. Thank you. And so also just to dedicate the merits of our practice today, dedicate the beneficial momentum that comes from hearing the Dhamma, from being together as Sangha, from recollecting the Buddha and all the people who have carried this tradition over time. May all beings benefit. May all beings be free from mental and physical suffering. May we all find profound compassion and kindness in our hearts. By the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts, may all beings be liberated. All right, everyone. Bye-bye. Take good care.